So welcome, and I want to thank every single person on this call, faculty, staff across this university. Um, you've done a tremendous job this year. The university, Tulane University, has come through this, I think, as well as, if not better than any other university in the country, through the incredible challenges. And it is truly due to your efforts, individually and collectively, that we've been able to confront what is truly an unprecedented situation. Now, let me say, I understand all of us have been challenged physically, emotionally, psychologically in these circumstances. It's been a difficult year for absolutely everybody. And in Tulane, how we teach, how we learn, how we engage with other people, all those have been turned upside down. We'd had to rethink how we undertake all of those efforts that make up the core of what this university is about. But let me say, we've come through it, I think, in an extraordinary way. And that truly is due to you. And it's not just a question of resilience, it's a question of thinking how to innovate, how to act creatively, how to, in a sense, confront challenges that are unique and require really a new process. Now, this is a webinar about the spring semester. And we're going to talk about the outlines of the spring semester, answer questions about it, and there'll be other opportunities where you'll be able to see frequently asked questions, talk to members of the university about what we're doing, and in a sense, we'll put out other pieces of information about our plans. But we really do view this as an opportunity to give you an overview of what we're doing. Now, just to step back, the plan, the approach we've followed from the beginning has been informed, I think, by two principles. The first is there's great value in the in-person education at Tulane University. We are a relational culture, place-based culture, and our education where students can engage with each other, can engage with faculty, faculty with each other, and employees with the rest of the community is truly important to our educational mission. Not to say that online education isn't very strong or that we didn't offer an extraordinary online education, but we recognize the value of what we do in person. But secondly, recognizing that, we also understood that in coming back on ground, we had to protect the safety of the community. That had to be further uppermost in our mind. And the approach we've taken is really what I call a belt and suspenders. It's not one simple strategy, it's multiple strategies, and it's in a sense responding to events as they occur over time. Now, I'm gonna go through what we did in the fall semester because I think it's the basis of what we're doing in the spring semester, and we'll talk about how what changes there will be with the spring semester. So what are the precautions that we followed? First, we brought all students on campus to an arrival center at the Hyatt so that they were tested and tested negative before they came back on campus. And all employees, all faculty were tested as well before they came back. The idea was to start out in a position of no positives on the campus. We built 14 classrooms as well as 4 other facilities to ensure that classes could be socially distanced. And that was, I'm not aware of any other university that took that type of effort. Obviously, and Robin Forman will talk about this, we've, in a sense, made changes over time to make those classrooms more accessible for students and faculty, and to make the classroom experience better. We obviously provided hybrid abilities in terms for all of our classes, where students could be both online and in the classroom itself. Robin will talk about the spring semester, where all of the classes will be able to accommodate the entire class on ground, so there's no requirement that they be hybrid. And obviously, we had a full court press on the behavior and following rules on our campus, masking, social distancing. Um, and I think the results were in general excellent. The masking of our students, I think, was almost 100% on campus, and even off campus, much better than the community in general. A lot of efforts in public service announcements and working to change the culture at Tulane. The heart of coming back, to some extent, though, was the testing. Um, uh, COVID-19 is in what we found in about 90% of the cases asymptomatic. So when you see institutions bringing people back, but not testing, they're really not identifying COVID-19. So for us, that was critical. We, by the end, were doing over 3,000 COVID-19 tests a day. During the course of the fall semester, we did 150,000 COVID-19 tests. Of universities that came back on ground, only 6% did universal testing like we did. And I think far fewer did the extensive, intensive type of testing. Again, we view that as critical to our to an effective and healthy environment because you identify cases before they manifest themselves. Also, a very robust isolation and quarantine system to make sure that individuals who were who were contact traced were isolated for a period of time. The results, I think, were generally excellent. And not to minimize for 1 second the challenges and the difficulties, but you step back, and I think all things considered, it was a very successful semester. The positivity rate of COVID-19 on the Tulane campus was far below New Orleans or Louisiana. The number of cases, well, it's hard to compare the actual number of cases since we were doing widespread surveillance testing and therefore identifying every case. But if you look at the guidelines on CDC about the spread of COVID-19, it appears to have been far lower on our campus than generally in the community. Let me say that we did have two challenges that are informing our spring semester. The first was when we first came back on ground, we did not have the capacity of pool testing, so we weren't doing extensive testing at the very beginning. And we think that is a very important moment when people come back from across the country, even though we did do testing of everyone before they came back on ground. We think the first 2 or 3 weeks an important time, and that was our experience in the last semester. So next semester, we will do very extensive testing right from the very beginning, multiple tests a week when students come back and faculty and staff come back. The other challenge was hurricanes. Clearly, hurricanes are a moment when all of the normal connections, relationships get discombobulated. People come together in ways that are different. And of course, in our case with Zeta, it occurred at the same time as Halloween. And we are looking, luckily, we're not expecting any hurricanes in the spring semester, but we are sensitive to events that might change the relationships on campus, as certainly occurred with that and Halloween. And around Mardi Gras, even though Mardi Gras has been canceled by the city, the parades were very sensitive to being on top of anything that might occur at that time. Let me also say that the student reaction and response to what we did, I think, is very positive. I can talk anecdotally about the hundreds and hundreds of students I and others have spoken to. I'm not saying it's universal, but the overwhelming student response was that they were so appreciative of all of our efforts and that we came back and provided an in-person education. But I can give you some statistics that reinforce that. 95% of our undergrads made the decision to come back in person, 95%. And I should say that as we look at the spring semester, Individuals who studied remotely have now made a decision to come back on ground. And I would say other universities that were both remote and on ground have had similar experiences for their spring semesters. Students do want to come back. Secondly, for the incoming class that entered in 2020, they saw our precautions and in a sense, they voted with their feet. That was a class where most selective, 11% students were accepted, but the yield was 37%. So that in a sense, they made the decision to come to Tulane. We're obviously partway through admissions for the class entering in 2021. And I'm happy to say that we've seen a 19% increase in early decision applications for the class entering next year. Across the country, I would say the majority of schools have seen a reduction in applications. We trade information with our peer schools. We're up more than any peer schools, and many of our peers are down. Again, that's I think a sign of the appreciation of students at Tulane about what we're doing, and a recognition that students around the country want to come to Tulane. I could go through all the things that have gone on so well, and the faculty and staff, you're responsible for these successes. Research during this period, we had the best year in terms of research funding in the history of Tulane, up 50% in the medical school. In terms of visibility, just sort of the press coverage of Tulane University, we track these things. It's never been higher. As one person joked, you're as likely to see stories about Tulane University in the New York Times or the Washington Post as you are in the Advocate. And again, that's a recognition of our faculty, of what they're doing, staff, how they really stepped up to the plate, and the country has noticed. A comment about the finances in these circumstances, and hats off to Patrick Norton and the whole team in this regard. We've obviously done a lot over the last few years structurally in our finances, but I'm really proud to say in fiscal 2020, which ended July 1st, we had a positive operating margin, which is quite unusual in higher education during this period. I know we stopped hiring during this period and in a sense, did not expend on a lot of initiatives, but we were able to retain a balanced budget. And for fiscal 2021, the current year, we're also been maintaining a positive operating margin, despite the fact, obviously, we've had to support 19 temporary structures and a testing program. We have not laid off anybody and I think that's critically important for New Orleans and our community. We've been able to provide testing capacity for New Orleans. We've been able to support the New Orleans community as part of this. And obviously, while we have frozen salaries, we haven't cut salaries, which is, I think is important to note, is unusual within the firmament of higher education. Let me say, just to give you a quick comparison, universities that did not come on ground above sort of across the realm, Harvard, Yale, for example, versus schools that may not be at that top category, have all seen sharp reductions in enrollment. Harvard and Yale about 25%. And I think those types of situations can impact not only the bottom line, but can impact your reputation and going forward. A lot of financial impacts, not to go in detail, but a number of universities have been forced to cut salaries, stop paying into retirement, run large deficits in these circumstances, given the challenges of lower enrollments. Just to give you one statistic, in terms of higher education generally, over the last 6 months, there's been a 15% reduction in employment in higher education across the board. We've never seen anything like this in the last 20 years in higher education. Indeed, over the last 20 years in higher education, the number of employees has gone up every year. I say this simply to point out that we've come through this extraordinarily well, through incredible challenges, and I know the difficulties every single person has faced in terms of their work, in terms of concerns about their own health, their relationships across the board. But you should take great pride of what we've accomplished during this period. And I do think it's a model for the spring semester, which is what we're going to talk about now going forward. Now, we sent out an announcement about the calendar schedule for the spring semester, and we will be following up with other announcements about more specific information of the spring semester, and we'll put up frequently asked questions and answers. And finally, let me note, we're all, like everybody in this society, subject to changes in public health, changes in public health restrictions. So what I'm saying is our current plans going forward. As we outlined, we're planning on beginning to have students come back as of January 8th to the Arrival Center. Classes, undergraduate classes, would start on the 19th of January. The calendar does not envision a spring break. We are taking those days off from the spring break and sprinkling them around the spring semester. We have found in our own data, and other universities have found, that travel is a serious challenge to the health and safety of the community, because when individuals leave and travel a distance and come back, the possibility of infection goes up. And so we think holding a normal spring semester wouldn't be a good idea. We did the same thing in the fall with the fall break. We did not hold a fall break, and we're following that in the spring. In terms of Mardi Gras, as you know, the city has canceled parades in Mardi Gras. So we're not envisioning an on-ground Mardi Gras. We have been looking through exactly what Tulane will do during Mardi Gras. At this point, we are recommending to hold classes on the Monday of the traditional Mardi Gras break. We would not hold classes on Tuesday. In terms of Monday, employees could, we're going to add an additional vacation day. So employees will not lose a vacation day, but that will be ordinarily a day the classes would be held and the university would be open. In terms of testing, we've learned a lot about testing. We already talked about the fact that we'll be, in a sense, testing everyone the first 3 weeks in a concentrated way, because we view that as a moment of where we need to be very vigilant. We are likely to be changing our quarantine rules. The CDC had said anybody who's a contact should be quarantined for 14 days. They've since changed those recommendations. If you test out, that is to say, you test negative after on the 7th and 8th day, and I think it likely we will be reducing that time, which will not only have I think a significant impact for the student body, but also for classes, because it should substantially reduce the number of students who would be out of class. The classrooms, Robin Forman will talk about the classrooms. A lot of work has been done, is continuing to be done to upgrade them, to make them a better place to teach, provide more support, and he will discuss that. In terms of the dorms, we've done a lot of exploration of the value of single rooms, and we found no evidence that single rooms are effective in terms of a safety measure. So will offer, as we did in the fall, a single room to students who want one, but literally we found no evidence that makes a difference. Finally, let me note a lot of questions about vaccines, and to some extent, we're all still working through what the impact will be of a vaccine. Obviously, vaccines, it's dependent on how many doses are available by what time, and then what is the decision rule about who has priority. At this point, we don't know what that will mean in terms of Louisiana, New Orleans, and Tulane, but it is highly likely that we would, when the time came, require members of the Tulane community to get a vaccine, and we would facilitate that, though we would, of course, recognize that some individuals may have religious reasons or health reasons not to take the vaccine, and of course, we would recognize that. But we do think that that's very important for the public health of the individuals and the community at large. I know there are questions about employees and when we might be bringing employees back to campus in a more systematic way. We have no plans to change our current rules at this moment, but and everybody would be getting notice at that about any change, and hopefully a fair amount of notice to help your plans. So with that, that's sort of an overview of what the last semester was like, what the future semester looks like in broad terms and a broad outline. But obviously, there are details that you may have questions about, details that we're still working through. And to answer those questions, we have an incredible group of people who have been involved in the front lines on working through Tulane's response to COVID-19. And they're on this call. I want to sort of briefly introduce each person. Shantay Bolton, who is Vice President and Deputy Chief Operating Officer. Jason Chretien, who's Interim Associate Vice President for Human Resources and Institutional Equity. We have Robin Forman, Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs and Provost. Lee Hamm, the Senior Vice President for Health Sciences and Dean of the School of Medicine. We have Anna López, who's Professor and Associate Provost for Faculty Affairs. We have Patrick Norton, Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. And last but not least, we have Scott Timms, Assistant Vice President for Campus Health. Just a note, Scott had a procedure on his back, which is why Scott is doing this webinar from his bed. So once again, a tip of the hat to Scott, who's been working incredibly hard through this entire process. And here he is doing the webinar from his bed. So anyway, thank you, Scott. We have several questions I wanted to start with. They've been submitted, and I think they're important answers. So I'll turn it over to Carrie Stockwell from my office to raise those questions and serve as moderator. Thank you, Carrie.
Sure. The first question, I believe, is for Provost Forman. It says, I understand a few organizations are pardon me. I'm sorry, this one's for Shantay Bolton, my apologies. It says, I understand a few organizations are returning to on-campus work at the beginning of the spring semester. Is the university transitioning back to on-campus work for all staff employees in the spring? How will this work, and when will we be notified?
All right, thank you. In support of our ongoing commitment to ensuring a safe on-campus experience for our students, we will continue to operate under a hybrid work arrangement, much like we did in the fall. And it is very much so based on the needs of the university operations. In that vein, for units that have determined it to be a critical business need to return their staff in support of our students back to campus, we've engaged in discussion with those units, those supervisors, to ensure we explore all options that are available and not just automatically default back to in-person. So at times it simply requires an in-person return. In that sense, we, generally speaking, the spring will be managed much like the fall, meaning that those who have been working remotely will continue to do so. Optimistically assuming the vaccination may come into play during the spring or early summer, we will accordingly revisit the plan to ensure we gradually transition employees back to work on campus in accordance with all of the safety, federal, state, and local guidelines. If you happen to be designated as an employee who is required to return to campus, we are working in partnership with the workplace assessment team and your designated HR business partner. You'll be notified by your supervisor with reasonable time. Usually that's 30 days notice. Oftentimes it can be much longer than that. And outside of an emergency situation, which happens far and in between, you will have advance notice. So it won't come as a surprise. Some of the things that I think are important to remember as a part of this process and why we want to give you advance notice is because that workplace assessment team that's comprised of occupational health and safety team members and emergency management and other key personnel across campus, they go in to assess the work environment, they make recommendations, and then work with the supervisors to install any workplace safety controls, ensure distancing of office furniture, protocols are put in common areas, and that includes things like installing plexiglass. We then require that employees will complete that return to campus compliance training. It's available. You can do it from any device within that department. And then there's a formal notification in which you will be given a date and any important information you need to know about returning to work and working safely. We continue to have a process in place to request any ADA accommodation should you need to, so that will remain as is. And while employees have expressed a great desire to return, because they are missing that synergy from the in-person interaction, I just want to reassure everyone that our first priority is the safety of our campus community, and any questions that employees may have regarding their specific situation are encouraged to discuss that with their supervisor and their HR business partner.
Okay, our next question is for Robin Forman. It says, many faculty faced additional stress teaching hybrid courses in the fall. What steps are being taken to improve the teaching experience for the spring?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Mike mentioned a few things in his introduction, and the notion of hybrid has many different meanings. So let me just take a few moments to clarify that. Courses, all of our on-ground courses will remain hybrid in the sense that students in isolation or quarantine will have the ability to Zoom into class and stay up to date on the academic work that they're missing. There are also courses that are hybrid in the sense that on Monday, they all meet in person, and on Wednesday, they all met online. And that will still remain an option for faculty. And some faculty took great advantage of, for example, the ability in Zoom to break out into small discussion groups that's much easier to do on Zoom than it is in person, and described an incredible array of kind of in-person and online activities through the spring. President Fitz referred to the fact that we won't be forcing faculty into hybrid models in the spring. That referred to a particular type of hybrid in which the classrooms were too small to hold all enrolled students at one time. In that case, faculty were forced to divide their class into groups, some of whom would, some students would attend a class on Tuesday and the others would Zoom in or do asynchronous work, and then they'd swap for Thursday. What we've done for this.
So while we wait for Robin, you're frozen. I should mention what we've done is arrange classes so that every class can be accommodated on ground in their classroom. Actually, I should let Anna jump in from the Provost office, because you've been much on top of this, obviously more than me.
No, that's okay. Obviously, you're right. Every classroom should hold all the students enrolled in the class. So that's a big difference from the fall. Whereas Robin was saying, faculty were forced to split up their classes and only meet with them half or a third at a time.
Anna, while Robin makes his way back online, could you talk a little bit about not only the upgrade in the classrooms, but I know we're providing more technical support to faculty in those rooms.
Yes, and this is very important. In the fall, we had a student squad of IT essential help. There was the kids who would go into the class and help faculty push buttons and turn things on. In addition to that, we're also going to have a new squad of Zoom assistants or Zoom producers, essentially, students who will be assigned to be in the classroom with that faculty member throughout the session, and who will be able to help the faculty member manage the back and forth between the live classroom, the in-person classroom, and the Zoom students, so that the faculty member doesn't have to be schizophrenically split into being in 3 places at once. So I think that's going to be huge. Robin, back to you.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I just lost my internet and then it came back on. Welcome again to the Zoom era. So yeah, so I heard Anna describing the Zoom producers. And they were very successful. It was a small program. And so that's probably the main, again, we're not requiring faculty to do that kind of hybrid, but we will be offering support. And moreover, what we're doing is increasing the tech awareness of the Zoom producers. That is, they'll be trained in the basic technology of the classroom equipment, so that not only can they be there to help manage the audience, say, Professor, we've got a question on the chat, but they will also be able to help in the rudimentary setting up of the technology.
Ron, you want to say anything about the upgrades physically to the classrooms? I know you were involved.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mike. Yeah, sure. You know, we did this campus-wide survey of everyone, and 2 of the main takeaways from both students and faculty, there were 2 consistent. One is the challenge of this kind of hybrid class that we were just talking about. But the second were the challenges with the temporary classrooms. And a couple maybe of the other non-traditional classrooms, but really the temporary classrooms. The temporary classrooms are an entirely new endeavor for us, essential to create the kind of on-ground education we wanted in a safe, socially distanced way. Our learning curve in the fall was a little slower than we would like because we had hurricane warnings and things like that. But they got better through the semester. And in the survey, we asked folks, what would you like us to do differently in the spring? One of the most common responses was, the temporary classrooms are better now than they were in the beginning of the semester, but we hope when we get back in the spring, they'll be even better. And so we took that very seriously. And we've made a series of improvements to the temporary classrooms. We've put echo reducing curtains around the classrooms. We've angled the speakers to reduce echo. We've increased the strength of the amps. We've turned down the air conditioning. We don't need it so much at the moment. And we have purchased, we haven't yet distributed, microphones to all faculty teaching anywhere, but in particular in temporary class, kind of microphone that goes around your head, and the mic is very close to your mouth. We've tested them out, and several of your deans and associate deans have also seen this. We've tested them in the temporary classrooms, and they work extremely well. Some of the classrooms, even without the mics, are now near silent, even some of the worst ones, given all the other changes. But some of them still have it actually depends on whether the air conditioning vents are on the side or on the back and whatever. But some still have a background noise, but with this microphone, you can hear the faculty member perfectly. And Noah Wong and his team are reviewing an app working directly with the company that produced the app that will enable students to be heard equally clearly in the classroom if it works. I saw a demo that seemed intriguing, but I'm not yet 100% convinced. Those are the temporary classrooms. I will also say that we are taking advantage of the break between semesters to dramatically improve the AV equipment in several other non-traditional classrooms. The spaces in the LBC, in the Commons and elsewhere. In those cases, we put the newer tech on top of a foundation of older tech, and it didn't work. It wasn't optimal. So what we're doing over the break is taking out some of the older AV things in those rooms and putting in newer stuff that's not only better than the older stuff, but will sync up more seamlessly with the newer stuff that we laid on top. So I am confident that in some cases, the problems will be solved totally, and in other cases, there will be dramatic improvements. But in all of the non-traditional classroom spaces. And we will be distributing these universal microphones before classes start in the spring.
One quick follow-up note. A lot of people had focused originally on whether there was risk of spread in the classrooms. We've done extensive machine learning on analyzing where a spread could or could not have occurred. I can say we have found no evidence of any spread in the classrooms at all. And That has been, I think, the experience across the United States. Is other universities have reported the same thing. So I just wanted to note that. Yeah, Carrie.
Next, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And our next question is for Patrick Norton. Does the university plan to continue with the salary freeze in fiscal year 22?
Just step back for a second and just reiterate what Mike said about the fiscal discipline we've deployed over the past years, right? Which has led us to a position where we're able to weather these type of storms, whether a pandemic or storms, right? So once again, the work we've done over the past years has set us up nicely. So we are in a position where we're not doing furloughs, we're not doing layoffs, we're not doing salary cuts, and we're not doing benefit cuts, right? So that's very important. And to that end, the 21 measures that we put in place will stay in place for fiscal 21. That is a hiring freeze except for essential positions, salary freezes, and also some discretionary spending curtailment, right? That's still in place for fiscal 21. While we're very optimistic about the spring, we still need to keep these measures in place. We have put forward a balanced budget to the board, to the faculty, to the rating agencies, to everyone, and we feel very, very, very bullish on the fact that we will hit that balanced budget for fiscal 21. So that's very good news in a world in which many institutions will not be able to say that. As far as fiscal 22 is concerned, we are putting our budget assumptions for fiscal 22 in place as we speak. They will be presented to the Senate, the Senate in January. It will be presented to the board in January. And in those budget assumptions at this point, these are drafts, it does have a salary increase program, just like we've had in the past. So I think that really should be good news to everyone on this call that we are building into our budget assumptions for fiscal 22 a salary increase program along the lines of what we've had in the past. Okay, so Carrie, I think that answers the question.
Okay. Next question. It says, I've had requests from students to take my courses fully online. How do we respond to this when our courses are designed as hybrid, or are students mandated to return to in-person teaching as much as faculty is expected to be back on campus?
Yeah, so that policy hasn't changed from fall to spring. When students choose to study remotely, and they do have that option, they are strongly encouraged to restrict their choices to the, in the spring, it'll be about 30% of our classes that are being offered in a fully online manner. If they want to explore taking a class that is not fully online or not designed to be fully online in a remote manner, they must request permission. And it is up to the faculty member, entirely up to the faculty member, as to whether or not they allow that student to study remotely, or any student to study remotely. There was actually an opportunity, in order to do this in a more organized fashion, when faculty were submitting their classes to the registrar, they could check a box saying whether they were open or not to fully remote learners in order to make this process go more smoothly. I want to make completely clear, though, because there's always, we are not encouraging faculty to say yes. And, you know, it's up to them to decide whether it makes pedagogical sense for a student to study remotely. And in some cases, the student may not be able to get the roster of courses studying remotely that they would like. And that's just kind of the reality of the moment. I mean, in order to get access to all of our classes, they have to be in residence. And that means that some students who really can't be in residence, who need specific classes, may not be able to get the semester they want this semester. At a time of extraordinary, you know, pandemics and other stresses we're facing, not everyone's going to be able to create the perfect semester learning in exactly the way they want to learn. So they are strongly encouraged to take courses that were designed to be taken remotely, and for individual faculty, they can decide whether or not they will allow remote learners. But if they choose to allow remote learners, they are in effect agreeing to create that kind of hybrid model where they've got a cohort of students on ground and a cohort of students zooming in, and they need to feel comfortable teaching in that way, and teaching and believing that they can offer a fully adequate experience to both. But if so doing would undermine the experience of the students, for example, or on ground in any way, then I actually encourage faculty not to allow remote learners, fully remote, semester-long remote learners. Again, it must be the case that students can Zoom in for weeks at a time because they're quarantining or isolating. That's required.
Our next question is about testing. Can you clarify the testing situation for staff coming back to campus in January? Will people need to be tested before coming to work, and will it be available before the first day back?
Sure. So, our return to campus testing for employees, all of the testing centers reopen on January 4th. The downtown testing center has limited hours throughout winter break. So if people wanted to get their tests prior to January 4th, they could utilize the center there. Otherwise, people should be going on January 4th in that first week to get their tests before they return to work. So there are some options in there, and it really depends on the situation of the department when they're expected to be back in office. But there is capacity to do it prior to the 4th. I think most people will be using the centers on the week of the 4th when we come back from winter break.
I have a question about the students. What are we doing to reduce the positivity rate among our undergraduate student population?
It's a hard question to answer. I think our strategy is for the return to campus, in order to not let it get out of, or to not have an increased surge, is that we're testing 3 times. So when the arrival center opens, all of our or when undergraduate students return, we're going to be testing them every other day up until the start of classes. So they're going to be getting 3 to 4 different tests based on when they arrive on campus. And so our contact tracing team will be in full force this time. And so really this spring start, our strategies are more robust. We have more capacity for testing, and we have a stronger contact tracing program. So I think that's been our focus on how do we have our interventions ready, able to be launched at the beginning versus the end. When we did last August for testing, we could not do as much testing as we'll be doing on that first day back this year. And so that's really going to be, I think, the control factor. The testing schedule for spring is going to look different. We're going to be testing much more frequently than when we started after classes start for both our graduate professional students and our undergraduate students. We have much more robust data tools now, so we can actually monitor to see if we're seeing increases in subpopulations that might need daily testing like we did after our Halloween surge this year. Our tools are much stronger. We have much more experience under our belt in managing outbreaks and surge. So I think that's what's going to help us in the spring keep the positivity rate down.
Yeah, and Scott, just to add, I mean, our model is pretty straightforward, and it's actually proven to be successful for the couple of surges we've had, which is, test like heck, and then get the positives out of the community into isolation, contact trace the close contacts and put them in quarantine. And it really wasn't an issue around space. While we did have, quite a few folks in isolation and quarantine at some times, that wasn't a gating issue for us. We did have the resources and the space, and certainly we beefed up our testing. So, I mean, that's our model. That's our core model, and we're going to keep at it in the spring. But as Scott said, a lot more testing on the front end. And I think Mike said it as well in his introductory remarks as well. Full stop.
There's a related question that asks, what are plans for providing opportunities for safer student social interaction on campus, like green space for outdoor activities or movies, music, etc.?
I'm not the expert on this, but I may know a little bit more than some of the other panelists, but this has been a priority for us going through the fall. We've created all kinds of, basically the fall was a period of experimentation, and some things worked well and some things didn't work well in terms of generating student involvement and participation. So we're doubling down on all the kinds of things that work well. We're creating more outdoor spaces, including, with tables and chairs. We are scheduling more university things outdoors. Some of the things that work well, for example, were previously unscheduled, unannounced things where the president would show up and hand out ice cream at some spot on campus. We'll be doing a lot more of those. I mean, roughly something a big surprise every week or so. There'll be some event where students can experience just a surprising moment of joy in an otherwise stressful environment. So there is Laura Osteen and Kelly Grant chaired a committee, a student engagement committee, which came up with a wide variety of plans for doing exactly that. So I think I should probably stop there.
Just to reinforce what Robin said, the fall semester, we were at this one time trying to ensure that everybody was socially distancing and the students were socially distancing, but at the same time, how do you, in a sense, continue all the engagement interactions that are critical to the undergraduate experience? We had a group that was looking at that for the fall semester, and they reassembled and are thinking hard about for the spring, what can we do that will, in a sense, allow students a better experience, and that includes everything from more online activities as well as in-person activities outside in a whole lot of different ways, it is first and foremost in our minds. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody from Student Affairs directly on this webinar. We did for the student webinar.
It's a question about access to campus. Given the challenges noted about traveling to campus leading to infection rates, is it fair to assume that the policy regarding outside visitors entering campus properties will continue?
Yes, absolutely.
The next question is, says, the entire country is experiencing an incredible surge with health leaders concerned that the winter holidays will exacerbate this. What are the university's contingency plans if the surge continues into the spring?
So as I said in my remarks, everything we are doing in planning is subject to changes in public health and subject to changes in public health recommendations by both city, state, and federal authorities. As everybody knows, we are seeing a surge nationally. Actually, the number of cases in Louisiana is not higher than it was back in July. But of course, the question is, what will be the impact of the holidays? And we've seen much more cases nationally. In other words, way back in June and July, it was localized. Now we see it across the United States. We are obviously monitoring this closely, and we will respond to different events. Again, it's the safety of the community is paramount, and we have found that we can provide a safer environment on campus. You can't eliminate risk, but in the fall, we did find that we could provide a safe environment. And I think we'll be thinking through those same issues in the spring. Obviously, you could see circumstances where, as in the case of other institutions, there have been delays of coming back on ground or reassessments. And obviously, we'll be looking at what's going on a daily basis.
We have another question on testing. It says, has asymptomatic surveillance testing been suspended for faculty and staff through January 4th?
The surveillance testing for faculty and staff is still ongoing, and the downtown location will be open through winter break. So anyone who needs to get their monthly test done should have access to a testing center right now.
Question about teaching. Will students be able to take classes satisfactory or unsatisfactory in the spring?
Well, it's a Tulane policy that all students can take a class, satisfactory or unsatisfactory, in any semester, at most one class, but there's a cap on the total number of SUs. And what we did is raise that cap from one class to two classes in the fall and the spring. And the second class doesn't count towards the total cap. So that in some sense, every student gets a free SU course in the fall and the spring beyond what they would ordinarily have. And those SNUs are subject to the same constraints that apply to the existing SU policy, which means they cannot be applied to courses being submitted to satisfy major or minor requirements, or for several of our core graduation requirements. The policy was voted in by the temp rate policy, voted in by the Committee on Educational Policy, does have the same policy for the fall and the spring. I'll just say a few words because I saw a couple questions fly by very quickly. I will tell you that out of the 7,700, that's a round number, of undergraduates that were registered in the fall, about 480 chose even one SU. So this was not a widely used option for students in the fall. That's about 6-7% of our students chose to even use one SU. And there's some concerns by faculty that they were taking a course SU that was a major requirement. And so I think that was part of the justification for the question. We sent multiple messages to students explaining what these courses can and cannot be used for. Then when they went to declare a course SU, information was provided again, and there were several buttons to click. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure? And we have not heard from any of the students in those classes that they made a mistake. So it is possible that students may decide later that they want to major in whatever that subject was, and they may have to retake a class unless the department agrees to change their policy and accept an SU for that introductory class to be part of the major. There may well be some idiosyncrasies in student behavior as we sort through this SU issue, but I think it's a minor price to pay. If you remember, the students were calling universally for some kind of freedom to do something like this. The student government voted in a formal resolution to allow all classes to be taken pass-fail, which is something we didn't think was in their best interest. And this policy was announced late because it was, there were, I don't know how many conversations I had, and there were others, the conversations I was not involved with, certainly with every school dean and the dean of NTC and others. So we did not make this decision lightly, but ultimately it struck us as the best compromise, a little pressure relief valve for students who were experiencing an extraordinary semester by any measure, with minimal impact on their ability to achieve their academic aims. So I understand there may be some awkwardness around the edges as students, it may be a slight uptick in students retaking classes here and there. But we do, it was a collective decision that this was the best way of addressing the multiple contradictory aims we were facing. But I guess the short answer is yes, their SU policy is for the spring as well.
There's two questions related to Mardi Gras. The first is, can you clarify the Lundi Gras vacation day situation? Are staff expected to work, or is it a vacation day? And also, how will the university handle parents who need to be off during the Mardi Gras break to take care of elementary and high school children who are out of school?
Carrie, I could take that one. Our thinking up until this point is to leverage a floating holiday for that Lundi Gras, so that employees, if they need to be off to accommodate childcare needs, or if maybe somebody's scheduled a vacation for Lundi Gras, they could still leverage a floating holiday for that day. If they chose not to, then they could use that floating holiday at a later date within the fiscal year.
We have a question about the COVID dashboard. Will the dashboard continue to be updated in December?
I can answer that. We actually are pausing the dashboard. I believe that was effective today, and it will restart on January 8th. The testing numbers are so low right now, it just makes sense to pause it until we come back. So.
Okay, and there's another question I believe is for you, Scott. It says, will we continue to receive daily phone surveys about COVID symptoms over the break?
The COVID text message, that's everybody's favorite daily text from us. We will pause that on the 18th, so you will get a full 2 weeks off. And yeah, so it's the only thing I've got to say lately that made everybody smile. So yeah,
I'm going to miss it, Scott. Hey, Scott, back to your other point about December. So far in December, the average test numbers in December about 400. So to your point about just not a lot of volume. And the positivity rate on those is less than 1%, 0.9%. To Mike's point earlier on, that was we're much lower than than our community at 0.9%, even on 400 tests on average.
Carrie, I would just also add, we're going to do another campus health update, and we'll work with HR on this one just to make sure employees understand the testing process for coming back in January. I noticed a lot of questions about that. So we'll do another update just so people are clear about how they can access it and sort of the timing on that. We can do that.
Okay, a question about the surveys. They say, I've seen the faculty and student response summaries, but not one for the staff responses. Will there be a summary of staff responses to the fall 2020 mid-semester survey? And how are those responses being utilized?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. And we will use those responses to inform us to any tweaks we need to make for the spring semester. So yes, so the answer is yes, they'll be shared thematically. And number two is we're going to use that to tweak our model. As I said earlier, our model is pretty strong and it works. But if there's anything that we learned through the surveys, we can tweak our spring come back to campus. Yep.
Okay, I think we have time for two more questions. The first is, are there any plans to de-densify housing and provide more singles during the spring semester?
So as I mentioned, we've looked very hard at the what are the determinants of spread of COVID-19. We have a very large data set, obviously, of thousands and thousands of people, and examined what in a sense explains spread. To boil it all down, single rooms do not seem to affect spread. The question, we have offered single rooms to any student on campus. They won't get the single rooms necessarily on campus, but we've offered it. We think there are benefits to being on campus, especially in terms of relational, mental health, other reasons, and therefore we have not, in a sense, de-densified the campus and moved people off campus. Other universities that have had students off campus have actually talked about moving them back on campus because they didn't think campus per se was a risk factor, and there are many benefits to students being on campus. That's a longish answer that at this point, no, we're not planning to, in a sense, de-densify the campus, though we are offering a single option to anybody who would like it, who's a member of the student body.
Final question. It says, is there a possibility that commencement will take place in person, or will it likely be a virtual celebration again? And when will that decision be made?
Don't know. As the answer to both questions. Will we have an on-ground graduation? Obviously, one of the great events in Tulane each year and in history are the graduations. We love them. But there are obvious risks in bringing 15,000 people together. And it's really impossible to predict at this moment what the state of the world will look like in mid-May. So we obviously can't make a decision right now. And we're really not in a position to say when we will be able to make a decision because we just don't know what the effect of the vaccine will be and how quickly it will be available to the community. So we can't, we don't know about that. And I'm not aware of any other university that's made an announcement at this time about their graduation.
Okay, I think that's it for our questions.
Okay, look, I want to thank all of you for tuning in. Obviously, this is a challenging time for everybody, but it is an extraordinary moment in the history of Tulane, and the faculty staff has done an extraordinary job. And we've talked a lot about sort of the health effect, situation in Tulane, the academics, the research across the board. Your resilience and your willingness really to step up to the plate to this moment has had individually and collectively an incredible effect on Tulane University. I also want to do a personal thanks to the people on this call, Scott Timms, Lee Hamm, who the medical school has been so important in providing protections, Anna López from the Provost office, Jason from HR, working through all the difficult issues. Obviously, Robin Forman stepping up and overseeing not only this incredible curriculum, but its evolution in new classrooms. Patrick Norton kept us financially in a position so that we could not only move forward on the health precautions, but Tulane really has been a model nationally in its financials in these circumstances. And Shantay Bolton overseeing literally everything that's going on in terms of our workforce and both on ground and remote. Incredible series of challenges in working that through. So I want to thank everybody on the phone, everybody on the panel. Please keep up the good work. I understand we're, as I say many times, we're in the 5th inning of a 9-inning game. And the spring semester is going to be obviously raise a lot of challenges, and we're going to have to adapt as we did in the fall semester. But I can't think of a better group to be facing these challenges with than the Tulane community. Thank you all for all the great work.